Welcome to CHEP Insurance Talk, an interview about risk and safety. This time, we are going to talk about a critical step in evolving to a predict and prevent model of insurance built on data and digital technologies. Our guest worked more than 8 years for Vienna Insurance Group as a digital coordination manager. He stayed with the topic the last 3 years, just as a startupist who built an insurtech startup, Vibli. Alexandros Dardas, welcome.
Thank you, Michaela, for having me here today.
Alex, I was really interested what makes a successful person after 10 years being part of a corporation leave that world and start his own company.
I left the corporate world for 2 reasons. The first reason is that I wanted to spend more time with my daughter, who was 15 years old back then when I decided to leave Vienna Insurance Group. And for me, that was my last chance of bonding with her. In other words, I wanted to be the master of the most important asset in a person's life, and this is time. On the other hand, I wanted to solve a problem I was facing during my career in the insurance industry. I saw that knowledge management is not professionally situated in insurance companies, and therefore I decided to dedicate myself to developing a solution for optimizing the profitability by identifying and minimizing claims leakage.
Yeah, that's what Vibli is about. But wasn't it possible to do it within the group? Because it seems like to implement innovations within a big company, as it's usually said, takes time, while when you set up your own company, makes it more rapid.
Yes, and let me tell you why. Because actually mastering my own time was the crucial part here. And when we're building, as I'm building now Vibli, I'm a motivator. I'm motivating people to engage in the visions that we both and equally are developing in Vibli.
So, what is Vibli? You've already said claims leakage identification platform. What does that mean?
Exactly. So imagine now if we take a claim, okay, a claims case, and we give it to 4 different experts to evaluate this claim. What happens is that we will get 4 different evaluations and 4 different amounts will be paid out. Now, the claims leakage is actually the difference between the lowest amount and the highest amount. And we are developing a software where the companies by themselves can actually identify this claims leakage and then set the correct measures in order to minimize this leakage.
Is this what you felt is missing in the digitization, or probably should we speak about digitization or digital transformation when it comes to insurance sector?
Definitely. Definitely, this is one of the biggest and most important issues, and you can hear everywhere, not only in insurance, that actually digitization is around us. And allow me to start with a definition of a digital strategy. And this is not always only corresponding to an insurance company. A digital strategy can be seen as a pyramid, which consists of 3 layers. On the top, we have the company's culture and the innovation appetite of the company. In the mid layer, we have the business model layer, where we have the existing business model and new business models. And on the bottom of the pyramid, we have the operations layer. This 3rd layer includes the processes and the organization, the distribution channels, the product and the services, and last but not least, the IT and the technologies.
I think very, very important moment to make this all work, to make it successful, is take the employees, the people within the company into that process. How to persuade them it's something good for them as well?
I would say that the digital transformation is successful, as you already mentioned, only if the entire organization is involved. The development of a cooperation mindset throughout the entire organization is essential. On the other hand, it is of great importance to develop a failure mindset. and insurers are not ready to fail. What I am proposing is the following. Don't fail when you do a project, but if you fail, fail fast. Therefore, a well-defined innovation process is inevitable. And in this innovation process, all the employees have to have the ability and also the perception that they are part of the success of the company. That means when we're doing something, when we're doing a project, we are piloting the projects, we are obtaining feedback, and finally, if the project is successful, we scale, and these are the parameters that make actually a project successful.
So this is, I guess, the way how you persuade your partners so that they move forward. Must be quite difficult sometimes, I guess. But how do you see it? Where are the biggest challenges nowadays, and what causes them? Except of persuading the people.
The biggest challenge, as I mentioned, is the mindset. This is the first biggest challenge. I mean, the insurance business is pretty traditional, and this is also how the insurance companies are also managed. Fortunately or unfortunately, there are always two sides of the coin. But this mentality of taking bold moves, this is what it is missing, especially internally in the company. Because if we take the external factors, we can see that actually there's a lot of money invested in insurtechs. That means if I imagine now the board member of the company, I am ready to put some money on the insurtech, and this happens outside my company, incorporate this insurtech in my own value chain. And this is that makes actually the whole thing a bit cumbersome.
Yeah, that's what we've already spoken at the beginning as well about. With the mindset as the core of the topic, I guess the pandemic situation could help a lot. Can you see change in there in the last 1.5 year or 2 years? Not really, I can see.
Come again?
It seemed like, oh no, it really didn't help that much as I would expect. That was like your face showing.
Yes. Look, the pandemic helped a lot the digitization. This is something that we have to embrace. Okay, but let's see a bit what happened now. Why the pandemic helped, and in which areas did the pandemic help? The pandemic helped us first of all with the interaction with our clients. Before, we were going to our clients' offices and we were going to the clients' homes. Now we don't have to do it anymore. That means we have all this. The distributors have the video calls, and this is what really pushed forward this idea. And this is the first part. The second part is actually the insurers have seen the necessity, or the pandemic accelerated the digitization. The insurance saw that they had to react very fast to this situation. And this is what actually also happened. That means the distributors were part of it, and also many other services have been very fast, actually, are very fast developed. And this is not only according to me. According to the EU Startups, the leading online publication website with a focus on startups in Europe, the pandemic has also disrupted the industry. And let me give you some figures here. 85% COVID-19 has accelerated the digital transformation of their operations and the creation of next generation operating model. And very important is by 2025, the market is expected to reach a breathtaking $6.4 trillion in value with a compound annual growth of 6%. So yeah, I think I see it positive. Let's put it this way. I see the positive things behind it.
I can see it, yeah, it's visible. But when we decide to invest some money into the digitization, we have a plan. What are the crucial steps to make it work so that it's not failure, or probably at the first step it's failure, but then it goes on successfully? What are the concrete measures?
In order to make the digital transformation a success, as we said before, first of all, we need the correct mindset. This is the very important thing, okay? But as with many things in life, okay, there is no one size fits all. In my view, insurance companies have been investing a lot in pricing and distribution. And I have the feeling that there are more insurance portals actually than insurance companies out there, and way more digital insurers with insurance products that are very similar to each other. Nevertheless, I still think that the product design and the claims optimization are the areas that the insurers are most lagging behind. The area of claims optimization has been driven mainly by changes of the core systems. Using data and existing expertise is very important for two reasons, according to my opinion. The first reason is the company internalizes the knowledge. And the second reason is that at the same time, the optimization projects are accepted by the business departments. And this leads to successful implementations, which are driven by internal ambassadors inside the organization.
How about the customer side? Because we've talked about the internal part of the company, the one who is driving it forward, the acceptance by the employees. And how about the customers? How are the customers willing to accept and adopt new technologies?
There are the customers. I see. Let's put it this way. I see an opportunity for things, as you said. There are two categories of insurance products. On the one hand, we have the commodity products. These are simple products like the household insurance, and we have also more complex products such as a life insurance. Okay, I believe that everyone who is working in the insurance industry can testify that we will need the personal distribution channels also in the future. That means the customer actually will take the helm on his hands. Recent studies have also shown that customers accept the digital contract, but they need a personal contact person for queries. And here comes my critique on the insurance industry. We see there is a trend for building these robo-advisors. Me personally, I hate these robo-advisors, and I'm speaking now as a client. These solutions are not intelligent enough, and very often they are stalling the process, and the client ends up being irritated. So I believe, especially in this case, that mixed models between human interaction and automatic interaction, robo interaction, however you want to call it, is essential. And an additional thing about the clients is that actually the insurers, we can see that they are incorporating the social media within their distribution channels. That means in the meanwhile, there are commodity products that I can buy through WhatsApp, for example. And this is very actually advantageous for the clients.
So the new ways of communication work well also in the insurance sector, as you've just said, because we really don't want to have an irritated customer, definitely not. But how do you see the part of collection of customers' data by means of technology such as wearables like watches or fitness bracelets?
There is a growing target group which is willing to share their personal data on driving behavior or fitness level with the insurer in order to have a cheaper car or a cheaper health insurance policy. However, not everyone is really ready for sharing everything, all of the data with the insurance company. That means also in the future, there will be offers without this option. Personally, I'm a friend of less regulation in this respect. And let's take the wearables, for example. If there is a person is there a person out there who does not want a better health and as an additional benefit to pay also less for the insurance? This is a win-win situation according to my opinion. But from the regulation perspective, I say, let the client decide on the usage of their personal data.
Yeah, but very often when you start speaking about tracking, it puts people off. They don't want to do that.
Yes, I mean, we cannot take all the people with us. That's why it's very important, and the insurance definitely will do it, will offer option for tracking and options without tracking. It's like the telematics today. That means I can choose in the companies if I want a telematics tariff or if I want a traditional normal motor tariff. This is very common, and this will continue also in the future.
Will this change the costs and the pricing policy significantly?
Definitely. These are the benefits that their clients are buying. That means actually the customers are becoming partners of the insurers. That means they are getting a discount on the pricing or on their policies and in exchange for the data that they are willing to share. So to answer your question, yes, definitely.
I was wondering how all this will change the position of, for example, actuaries in the whole business, because will they be needed anymore in the work they are doing right now?
The actuaries is the heart of the insurance companies. Of course, they will be needed in the future, but their work will shift a bit. That means the actuaries will work with data coming from a pool of data. And this is the buzzword we all hear. This is the big data. That means the actuaries will have more access to data, and with help of data analytics, they will be able to make actually more customized offering for the client.
Yeah, I just realized that I asked only about the side of the customer, but how about the company? How it will be with the costs for the business? How it will influence?
This is something that we have to see. Actually, we are not sure. Let's be honest. Also, the insurance companies, they are in the beginning of this digital journey, but the digitalization of a company, it's not only about the products. That means the companies will use the digital opportunities in order also to reduce costs, especially in processes that are very easy to be automated.
So, what do you see will be the biggest change? What is now the biggest challenge ahead of insurance company to take and go through it and rise on it? Where do you see the biggest challenge now? What are the most actual topic when it comes to insurance and digitization?
The biggest challenges that I see are actually the biggest challenge I have seen is that the incumbents have an issue with their legacy systems and their IT. Some insurance products are very long lasting. This also means that the systems on which these contracts are managed are sometimes 30, 40, or even 50 years old. And let me tell you a funny story here. I remember when I was in VIG, in Vienna Insurance Group, we were calling people back from their pensions to support us in the project since we did not have ASCII developers when we were introducing a new core system. The introduction of new core systems brings me also to the next challenge that the insurances have. And this is the cooperation with us, the cooperation with insurtechs. The concept of interfaces to insurers does not work at all, at least not at the moment. As much as the insurance companies want to adapt to this, connecting a 50-year-old system to a 3-month-old application is not an easy task. So this legacy with which insurance companies are actually around, this is the technical challenge that they are facing.
And I guess it's very good when somebody has the experience from both sides, which is your case. So, digitization is advancing rapidly. Where do you see the insurance industry in, let's say, 5 years?
So, if I had this crystal ball, okay, I would see more areas. Level. On a product level, I don't expect any big change in the next 5 years. I read very often that Generation Y and Z will not be willing to sign a long period contracts. I do not agree with this idea. Long period products, such as a pension product, are attractive exactly due to their longevity. On the other hand, the commodity insurance is already simplified, and this trend, of course, will continue. I will continue to be able to conclude a household insurance or a sports accident insurance online without consulting anyone. The difference to the current status quo will remain the excellence of the processes, as we discussed before. That means the processes will be designed in a channel adequate way. For example, if a customer writes a letter, of course he will get the answer after a week. But when a customer contacts us through WhatsApp, then they expect a response within minutes. So the appropriate processes will come and will be implemented. And the last part that I see is we talked about the ecosystem in this legacy and the IT systems of the insurance. This ecosystem, these big projects, okay, they will be developed in the future. They will be already done. And when these projects, this progress will finish, then it will start giving us results. That means insurers will have the ability to integrate new business models in their value chain, and the cooperation with external partners will become a lot easier and faster thanks to new open IT architecture concepts.
So everything will be really more immediate and quickly solved. And where do you see yourself in the same time, as you are also into the aviation industry, public transport sector in Greece? But what I especially like is the business you have with your daughter, Veganale, which is the vegan nail polish. So which direction do you like the most?
I have to be honest with you. I've been already like 10 years in the insurance industry. And my main focus will be actually Weebly. That means this development of a claims leakage identification platform. This is my main focus also at the moment, but also in the future. The Veganale that you mentioned, thanks for mentioning it, was actually thought to be like a startup for my daughter. That means we built it up together. I educated her how to build a company, and that was the idea. The aviation industry, on the other part, is of course very interesting industry also for myself. But this is how I am actually I'm taking the dreams of my network and I'm supporting them to develop their dreams and also to execute them. So many more projects will come in the future. I don't know it yet.
But thank you very much. Thank you for following your dreams and helping the others also to follow them. That was Alexandros Dardas, CEO at Weebly and a digital technology specialist and enthusiast. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you, Michaela. Thanks a lot and have a nice day and stay safe during these very challenging times.
Yeah, thank you very much. You too. And thank you all for following us again with the CHEP Insurance Talk. If you want to hear more, don't hesitate to visit the YouTube channel of CHEP, or you can also use your favorite podcast application and enjoy listening to more of our interviews. Have a good day.